So today I will talk about the different phases of disturbance that each time we can unfortunately recognize more of them. This work, as I mentioned, is a part of my PhD thesis, and I received a great help from José Rafael Paris and Ada Sanchez Mercado to make this project possible in very unfortunately adverse situation in Venezuela in terms of politics, economics, and social crisis that is present in this country since 2010, when it's the moment actually when I started my work there. But it's amazing. Venezuela is an amazing country and one of the most diverse, one of the 10 most diverse countries in the world. So it's absolutely the perfect place to make a work about biodiversity and conservation. So we will start with the definition. What is actually the disturbance? And the green describes as the disturbance as equivalent to the partial or total destruction of the biomass. We can recognize the natural disturbance like floods or hurricanes or fire and wildfire that can be also initiated by people. So here we enter the disturbance that can be provoked by people, like, for example, deforestation. As I mentioned, each time we recognize more and more disturbance, and one of them, like mining, is increasing all over the tropical regions in Africa, in Asia, and in South America. Unfortunately, they bring very destructive consequence for the ecosystem, terrestrial, aquatic, and they are crossing the borders. So for this research, I decided to take the definition of disturbance as the event or force of biological origin or not that cause notable changes in the distribution and abundance of different organisms in the ecosystem they inhabit. So this image of deforestation, it's one of the topics that actually is present in the public debate. We can see that in the news, in different languages. Every time we see different measures of deforestation in different parts of the world. So it's kind of news that we can see every day. And this information that every day the area of the size of New York is disappeared because of deforestation or different kind of measures that we can hear. So in South America, we can distinguish easily this green spot of forest, of Amazon forest and Guiana Shield that is on the north. That's basically covered by forest, or used to be. In Brazil and in Colombia, we can right now find the highest rates of deforestation among all countries, and it's actually getting double in case of Colombia. After the moment, if you you know that some years ago the conflict with one of the guerrillas, one of the force in Colombia has ended, but as a consequence, the deforestation has doubled in this period. As we can see on the north, Venezuela and Guianas, it seems to be intact, but if this is the situation that will maintain in the future, well, we will see in the continuation of this presentation. So there are different hypotheses related to the change of biodiversity in response to decrease of amount of forest The first one is that biodiversity increase on a linear trend in response to changes in total amount of forest, is known as habitat amount hypothesis. And another one states that biodiversity increase on a nonlinear trend in response to changes in total amount of forest, including a threshold point around 30%. So when we think about disturbances, it's just, they can only bring the negative consequences. But in this term, we only focus on one of the factors, that is amount of forest, the cover of forest as a response. As a response, we see the difference in biodiversity. But in 1978, Connell proposed the hypothesis about intermediate disturbance, which means that diversity reach its minimum at intermediate level of disturbance, as we can see here. And it takes on account not only the amount of forest, but different disturbances that we can measure. And I will try to show you how we can do it for Gran Sabana, for Venezuela, for my study of my area study. This is another example of deforestation that we can see in the forest, in many forests of South America, but it's not that drastic as we saw before. This one is the example of swing garden, which is the traditional practice of indigenous people when they plant different vegetables and produce like manioc, and they produce a very their typical food out of it. So here, this kind of disturbance is common, and it can produce changes, of course, in forest ecosystems. So here we can talk about the hypothesis of garden hunting. It's not very common, and it's not studied broadly. So the garden hunting hypothesis states that modification of plant community and in situ care of domesticated plants in a shifting cultivation scheme may generate favorable conditions for wildlife, resulting in higher abundance of herbivorous species, which means that actually that we have this kind of garden, we can both cultivate plants and at the same time we have like a higher chance to hunt species, herbivorous species that are also the source of protein for these indigenous communities in the middle of highland Amazon. Why I decided to take mammals as my focus group? It's because they are most sensitive gills in tropical areas, predators, and also herbivorous. The diversity of sizes and trophic groups indicates the complexity and stability of the ecosystem, and we still are missing quantitative information on the response of mammal communities on local, regional, and global threats. Of course, we are interested in meta-analysis of data, as it can bring the bigger picture of particular situation or analysis of the disturbance. However, when we are missing the local studies, like this one that I'm going to present you, we are missing a very important point, especially that the characteristics of different ecosystem among Amazon, highland, lowland, indigenous groups that have their taboos, they have their very particular cultural characteristics, may affect mammals community differently. So in this moment, we will move to the Gran Sabana which is the part of Venezuela, southwest part of Venezuela. It's characteristic by the Table Mountains, Tepuy, one of the most ancient in the world, with their very characteristic endemic fauna and flora. However, we will focus on what is going on above these mountains, which is the mosaic of forest and savanna. This is why I decided to start my study in this part of Venezuela, because it seems to be the ideal scenario to study natural and anthropogenic disturbance. It's occupied by indigenous Pemon communities. Actually, we still don't know when they came to this part of South America. There are studies saying that it might be between 2000 or even more years ago that they came to Gran Sabana. And also this part of a very particular highland ecosystem is it's a part of Canaima National Park, which is in 1994 was designed a UNESCO heritage, and it's, if you can imagine, it's 10 times bigger than all national parks of Poland together. It's so huge that actually in the moment when it was created, it was one of the biggest in the world. Unfortunately, current conservation status of this park is under the threat, and we will talk about it in the continuation. So during this presentation, I will focus on disturbance like habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. It is very important to distinguish these two that are commonly confused. So habitat loss has large and consistent negative effects on biodiversity. When habitat fragmentation, it has much weaker effects on biodiversity and can be both positive and negative. Another one is fire. That is a key component in indigenous group Pemon cultures. With fire, they create conucos, these swimming gardens that you just saw. They prevent bigger fires with small fires. They communicate, they use they practice magic rituals, they make cleaning, facilitates the capture of fish, or repel dangerous animals. So it's crucial in the culture of Pemon. And finally, hunting, which is a common practice among Pemon, and they hunt for subsistence, which means they hunt for the use of protein in their families and their communities. They don't sell this protein on the market. At least it was the situation that we could find some years ago. So the most important question that I would like to address during this presentation is, which disturbance affects mammals on the Grand Savanna the most? Which species are more abundant in modified Sweden gardens habitat, and which species are preferred for hunting? So once again, we move to Gran Sabana. Here I show you my study area. That are two polygons that together it's more than 1,000 kilometers square. So there was a lot of walking, believe me, because a lot of these parts, they are not accessible by cars, even this 4x4, I just forget the name in English. So the study area was pretty big, the elevation between 700 to 1,400 meters. I was working in 6 different indigenous communities, all of them Pemon, all of them the group Arecuna, and the field work took place in 2015, 16, and 2018. So as the question is complex, the study design was also complex. I decided to divide my study area in 10 blocks, each of blocks of 50 kilometers square. And I described 2 parameters for each block. That was the forest cover and fractal measure of fragmentation. And all this to obtain the gradient of perturbance among blocks. And each block was divided in 25 cells, 2 kilometers squares each cell. And for each cell, there were 2 parameters described. The vegetation, that could be savanna, predominance of savanna, forest, and predominance of forest. And another one, there were fire, the frequency of fire in last 15 years that we can obtain by the radars and satellites information. So all this complex design was supported by data from camera traps, tracks, and interviews with indigenous communities. So I was locating camera traps inside the cells that I mentioned you just, and every 2 months I was changing batteries and cameras, and sometimes the end position of the camera in the block to obtain the better cover of habitat in each block. And from camera traps, I was analyzing pictures and videos of mammals, and additionally tracks. All analysis was done with ARGIS and air. What was new for us was using the model that the resource selection probability models, using both direct data like from camera traps and field observation, as well as indirect like tracks, burrows, bones, and any other presence of mammals, and as well the effort of sampling effort by walking and visiting all these places. We also analyze beta diversity and the preference and importance of prey using interviews, as I mentioned. So to move to results, with the sampling effort of more than 5,000 camera day, we register 30 species of mammals, 7 species of carnivores, and 16 species of birds. That wasn't the objective, of course, of this study, but it was very interesting to observe many species of birds that are sharing the same spot, same spot with mammals, and are also important prey for Pamon indigenous group. So we had the chance to see very unique and elusive species like giant armadillo that is actually endangered. And interestingly, the people from the communities really don't see this species. However, it's very slow, and they could hunt it easily because it's like the length of 1 meter, and it moves slow, but somehow they cannot notice this species very close to the communities. And another interesting species is jaguar, that it's a vulnerable species. And one of the taboo of Pamon is that they don't hunt any wildcats like jaguar or ocelot or puma, and they don't also hunt any armadillos that we saw before. So moving to the results, as we know, this is nothing really new. We have a lot of studies claiming that increasing forest cover explain increasing species richness. And in this case, we expressed it by the estimator tau 1, and here both we have the forest cover, so we can see this linear tendency. However, we have these two spots that somehow, two blocks that go out of this tendency, and one of them, however, they have a similar forest cover. The big difference between them is the fragmentation level. So here above we have similar, we have high fragmentation index, while on this another block that has higher species richness, we can see lower fragmentation level. So we really need to take into account this factor of fragmentation. There are like 40 different measures of fragmentation, and it's kind of phenomena that's very difficult to estimate, and it depends really on what kind of group of mammals or insects or birds we are investigating. So what is the optimal is trying to include as many groups as we can to see different responses. So here, this habitat amount hypothesis seems to be what we observed. However, we need to take on account the fragmentation level on different ecosystems. So we move to this, I can imagine for some of you, new hypothesis of intermediate disturbance. Here is the main tendency that we can see, that in the middle of the perturbance, we can see the peak of richness. Here is our gradient of perturbance starting from the forest without any fires, and here on the other extreme is the savanna with the many events of fires. So as we can see, our pattern does not fully respond to intermediate disturbance hypothesis. However, we see that there is another peak of richness in the middle of this gradient of perturbation. It's not only that we can observe so many species in the forest without any fires, but we can also observe a lot of species in this intermediate perturbance gradients. So as we can see among diet group, this extreme perturbance with savanna and fire, there are almost no carnivorous species that we can observe in other habitats. So it can say that carnivorous species are the most sensible to changes like lack of forest and fire. It's the result that we can confirm with the analysis of beta diversity, which is the phenomenon composed by nestedness and turnover. In our case, it turned out that nestedness phenomenon dominated over spatial turnover, describing beta diversity in the region, which means that a non-random process of species loss occurs as a consequence in this case. As we can see here, we have the gradient of disturbance from the savanna without fire to savanna with a lot of events of fire, and here we have the species of carnivorous. So it is what we can see is that carnivorous are the group of mammals that are most sensible to these disturbances, while herbivorous species are they have different pattern of nestedness. They are not, which means that they are not that sensible to disturbance that we are measuring. And as we predict, the forest is the most important factor for the presence of the most of species, and we obtain here for 3 species that are, our result was statistically significant. That is agouti, tapir, and red brocket. These are species that we can see here, and they are marked green on this graphic. And there's one species that we have here down, which is related to the ecosystem of savanna, and it prefers this kind of habitat, which actually corresponds with literature and information that we have for this species. When we look closer to shifting cultivation, this garden hunting, this garden, Sweden garden that I show you, there are species that are attracted to this kind of habitat, and for 2 of them, again, agouti and red brocket, this habitat was more attractive, and they can, which means that we can find this species close to conucos, to these gardens. Maybe they find their resources, food resources that are looking for, and for this we can find this species, and it means that Pamon community can find the prey that is possibly interesting for them closer to conucos, closer to Sweden gardens that they are actually cultivating plants, and they in the same space find the protein source for them. It seems that fire is not the factor that gave us the very clear answer that any of the species is significantly repelled or attracted by this factor. However, we can see that some of them, that there are peccari and other species of deers that are somehow attracted, but we haven't obtained the significant response. So we move to hunting. That, as I mentioned you, it's the custom for Pamon community. And following the interviews that was performed, it turned out that the most important prey are those 3, which is tapir, paca, and white-tailed deer. And as we can see, that the preference prey was actually wild-tailed deer. The bad news is that there was one of the species with the lowest occurrence during all this study, and which means the lowest abundance. And what is the reason for that? Actually, because it's the preferred species, the very same Pamon, the very same indigenous people, they said that they prefer the species they hunted a lot, and they are aware they somehow deplete from this species from the ecosystems, which is the information that we should take on account in any conservation actions. However, we can see that the pattern of, we cannot observe the pattern of defaunation as we expected in the beginning. It seems that they practice hunting in the sustainable way. However, during last time, they have very limited hunting activity, as 80% of indigenous people, they prefer to hunt with shotguns, but due to particular situation in Venezuela, they cannot find ammunition. So they are just starting to hunting again with the arc and other very traditional way of hunting for them that is not as effective as shotguns. So we cannot really obtain the very clear pattern what is going on with hunting in the Grand Sabana right now, especially that they are facing big changes right now. So among all disturbance, lack of forest followed by hunting are the most important factors shaping mammals' richness. Vicinity of cultivation attracts several species, changing their pattern of distribution. As you can see, carnivorous species disappear first as fragmentation increase, while herbivorous species are more resistant to landscape change. With increasing perturbation, species loss occur, not replacement of other species adapted to perturbation. And as we can see as well, the camera traps are very powerful tool for monitoring and conservation, and also education. You cannot imagine people that at the beginning were kind of skeptic about what is going on and what is doing this white skin, blue eye girl in our community, and what is all this about, and what is this equipment. So it took a lot of time to involve people in the research, get their attention, and also the confidence. So, but in the moment when we passed all these moments, it was incredible how the results of camera trapping with pictures and videos attract people's attention, and they change their attitude. So it's really not only in the place when we are in the community, but also in Poland, that I had the chance to start classes with children in Poland, so 8,000 kilometers from Venezuela, but also organizing expositions here in Caracas to explain and to share the information about their fauna in the very same Venezuela. That was very powerful for children in Caracas that have never visited Gran Sabana. Well, actually I could stop here my presentation, because we learn about, however, a little bit, because the problem is very complex, about the disturbance in Gran Sabana, and get to know better the approach to study them. I show you the approach of model that we were trying. We are about to publish it, so we can, I hope I can share this information with you. So we can also discuss methodology, also that increasing the sampling effort is what we are looking for to make, and in consequence to increase the model robustness, which is what we desire always. We could talk about the better resolution of satellite or radar images that bring us more precise, detailed information about landscape changes that we can observe in this amazing, beautiful, and unique ecosystem on the world. But unfortunately, I was forced to stop my study in this place, not because I wanted, because it's what we actually find right now in the south of Venezuela. So I decided to talk about the future of this place and the problem that we're facing in Venezuela right now. So as you can see here, we have the map of national parks in Venezuela. national parks that cover almost 23% of the country. They have 44 national parks, and one of them, this one, is 75,000 kilometers. So can you imagine that? It's a huge park. I'm not saying that it's perfect to have the park that you can see have bordered pretty artificial. Unfortunately, it's another paper park that was assigned in Venezuela. But what is most, what I wanted to show you here is the deforestation rate that is present in the south of Venezuela, that you can see on this map. Green part is forest, or should be forest. What is the reason of this increasing deforestation rate in this part of Venezuela? Is mining. Mining that it's been present in Venezuela since the 18th century. It's been always there. There is a city named El Dorado, the famous one, when during the Golden Fever, a lot of people from all the world came to extract gold. So this is the picture of the mine that I had a chance to visit, and it was almost the one-way ticket. We were very lucky to leave this place all safe. But trying to start or continue research in this part of the world right now, it's dangerous for us, as researchers, any people that is involved in the project. So we really need to be very we cannot really continue the research. Here is another picture of national park with the rivers that shouldn't be in this color, that it's cappuccino. Maybe it is the color that's characteristics for lowland rivers. But on Guiana Shield, the most of rivers should be black water, not brown water with a lot of sediments. It means that the ecosystem is in a very bad shape, and then we can see here there are mining sites increasing. So as I mentioned you, there are a lot of scientific projects are stopped because people, as the researchers and any NGOs, cannot really continue the work. In the country like Venezuela, that is so famous because of the oil reserve, right now the cost of 1 liter of gasoline in this place, like this, it's $7. Can you imagine? So you just cannot go on the field work as easily as you could do like 2 years ago, when gasoline was much cheaper than water in Venezuela. What is going on is that the government decided to create the big project of Orinoco mining ARC. That was idea to legalize and control the mining that was occurring in Venezuela since many years. So in 2016, they created this Orinoco mining ARC zone. It covers 112,000 kilometers square. So it's the size of Portugal, or 1/3 of Poland. So it's amazing and it's huge. And unfortunately, there's no control as they expect to have. So their mining actors often stand in non-compliance with environmental and social cultural impact studies, and they violate rights to pure consultation, cultural and natural heritage in indigenous and non-indigenous communities. So we have 14 indigenous groups in this area. There are a lot of vascular plants and vertebrates that are actually in danger right now. Not only Venezuela, because this, the consequence of activity of mining at such a big scale extends far into Guyana via Cuyuni River that you can see on the picture, and to the southeastern Caribbean via Orinoco Delta plum. So it's not only the problem of Venezuela, it's already the regional problem that should be that should be treated on the international level. I can imagine that most of you know the red list of species, but there's also something like red list of ecosystems where you actually can categorize ecosystems following the assessment of red list. In this case, we don't have the species that extinct, but the ecosystem that collapse, because ecosystem does not disappear like a species, but it can get so transformed that it actually is not the initial ecosystem, so we call it collapse. As you can see on this map, there is a different part of Americas that ecosystems are threatened, mostly by deforestation, as in here in Brazil or in the humid forests in Andes, in between Colombia and Ecuador. So when we see a Guiana Shield, it seems that everything is perfect because we have here a green spot. There are some forest ecosystems that are more vulnerable because of climate change, which is one of the category that we are taking into account making the assessment of red list of ecosystems. And what is going on here and what wasn't taken into account so far, it's mining activity. We made some very short models of taking into account different scenario of local development and deforestation in this spot, in this polygon that you can see here of Orinoco mining arc, that show that actually the forest ecosystem that we thought it's not in danger in future 15 years, it can get vulnerable or nearly threatened by the presence of mining and this development plan that is actually going on in Venezuela. So what I wanted to ask you is if you're interested, here are some links that you can look for more information, and actually they are breathtaking and very heartbreaking, better to say, pictures and relation about not only ecosystems, but peoples and what is going on with mercury contamination and all the perspective that it's very dangerous for ecosystems and for people as a part of ecosystem. I decided to make this kind of change in very famous lately meme. So at the beginning we spoke about this disturbances fire, which is very common and kind of very important in savanna ecosystems. So among fire, deforestation, and wildfire and hunting, it seems to be very like something that we shouldn't so worry about, or looking on what is going on and what is coming, which is mining and the very big scale of this activity that is not only for ecosystems but for society. So here shortly, I would like to thank so many people that helped me an organization that helped me to make this research possible. And I invite you to ask questions. And well, mostly I would like really want you to spread the information about Orinoco mining arc. And I'm also interested in looking for collaboration with organizations and research institutions that are working on mining or mercury presence in both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystem. Any kind of this kind of rapid assessment that can be done on field work easily. So this is everything from my part. Thank you very much for your attention, and please, I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you so much, Izabela. This was incredibly interesting and sad to hear. Okay, so we have first questions, but I'm going to use my role as a moderator to ask the first one. So what would have to happen to make it safer for you and other researchers to come back to Venezuela to do your research?
Well, unfortunately, we required a very big change. I have friends that are working in this part of Venezuela. They're still there. But this picture, this video, short video that I show you, and that we were actually in the mine, my friend who was working there with one of harpies, they received calls saying that you cannot really continue your research in this part. So they are receiving live threats. So we really require the change of government in Venezuela. It's in the very first place. And then I need to tell you that Venezuela was the first country in South America that actually had the Ministry of Environment. They were leaders. And right now they're at the very end of all countries in terms of research, investigation, and a lot of researchers are leaving the country because they cannot continue working. Our salary, monthly salary, officially is like $10. So you cannot live, make your living out of that.
That's very difficult. Thank you. I just also wanted to say that Izabela agreed to that if there is many questions, she can stay for a bit longer than until 6 o'clock. So so don't worry about not having time. And Charlie raised his hand, and I asked you to unmute, so you can unmute now, and you can talk. Yes, hi Charlie.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Izabela, for what was a really interesting presentation, particularly to see both the local study you did, but also a bit about the context and the future, which, yeah, was fascinating and worrying. So I work in Colombia, towards the Amazon, and so I take your point very much about the mining overriding the importance of fire, but certainly it seems to me where I'm working that the fire is still quite important. So I'd really like to know a bit more about your thoughts on that intermediate disturbance hypothesis, because I'd like to know what you think about the sort of time scale of that over the future of these ecosystems, because is there a possibility that while fragmentation in the short term, a certain amount might boost biodiversity, could there be a sort of local extinction debt that will then cause less biodiversity, even if there's no further fragmentation, but 10 years down the line or something? Does that make sense?
Okay, well, thank you, Charlie, for your question. Well, the situation of Gran Sabana is very particular because we cannot observe this fragmentation pattern that occurred recently that you can see in, for example, in Colombia or in Brazil, that practically from one day to another, the fragmentation occurs because there is the encroachment of farms or other activity that requires deforestation. This mosaic of savanna and forest in Gran Sabana, it's been there as paleontology studies showed for thousands of years in different proportion. So in this ecosystem. This is why I mentioned that. It's very particular, the presence of fire. As we know, fire is the natural factor in many savannas of the world, in Africa or in Australia. Actually, in Australia, they have studies related to intermediate disturbance hypothesis, claiming that depending on the scale of fire, frequency, and intensity, it can bring positive feedback on diversity of particular group of species, both plant and animals. So it's really hard to give a very clear answer that's okay, let's put the fire, or just like to stop making any kind of fire management, that it's actually the part of big discussion and very hot discussion in Grand Savannah, because when we stopped fire, that was occurring in for example, Grand Savannah for thousands of years, there will be other changes that we know that in part like Yellowstone, they stop any kind of fire, and it brought very negative consequences for the ecosystem. So actually they changed the management to put these temporal fires, preventing bigger fires. It is very complex issue, and depends a lot about of kind of ecosystem and the dominance or predominance of savanna in that ecosystem. So for the forest, if we have the forest and we just start deforesting and using fire, it will bring the much more negative consequences than if we considering the savanna ecosystems and the natural presence of fire. I'm not sure if I respond your question, but the fire issue is very complex one.
That's really helpful. Yeah, it's fascinating how that dynamic works actually in a savanna forest mosaic. So thank you for shedding some more light on that.
No, thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Joanna Bagniewska on the chat, and it reads, in Africa and Asia, there is a big risk of zoonotic diseases spread due to bushmeat hunting and butchering. Is this also the case in Venezuela?
Well, of course, there is, but we have no studies to confirm particular cases of this kind of spread of diseases in Venezuela. What is very worrying is that due to this economical and social crisis, people start hunting. I'm not talking about indigenous communities that they are hunting for subsistence. I'm talking about people who are leaving the city to hunt, to get meat, or to get the species, vulnerable species like jaguar, to take all out of jaguars, which means skin, fat, meat, to sell it, because they are in a very desperate situation. So we have reports of this kind of increase of activity in terms of hunting, but we have no research currently about the spread of diseases.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from anyone? I saw some raised hands, but then they were lowered. Just some more time for making, oh, Casa, okay, hi. I will unmute you. Okay, you're unmuted, okay. Casa.
Great. Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. It was so interesting to hear about your research and your experiences. And I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit more about your career path, because I was just thinking a lot of us maybe spread around Europe, and it just sounds, I would be really interested to hear how you ended up doing this research, what motivated you, and yeah.
To start my research in Venezuela?
yeah, or in general in this subject?
Okay, well, my adventure somehow, if I can, well, I need to say that it was adventure. Started in 2009 when my university, that time that was Guiana University, started. One of the subjects was tropical ecology, and our field work was in Venezuela. So we spent 1 month during our short projects, and then we were traveling around Venezuela. And this is when I saw Gran Sabana for the first time in my life. And as many other researchers, I just fall in love in this place. And in 2 years, then we were organizing the one expedition to one of the tepuis that wasn't unreached before, which is Tramen Tepui. And this is why I had the chance to going back to Venezuela, to Tepui, to the very first, the very same place when I did my thesis. So that was this kind of 7-year history that it took me to get to place when I started my thesis. And when I moved to Venezuela to start my doctorate, I learned how to use camera traps. And this disturbances context, for me, it's one of the most hot right now and most important to investigate. I know that the study is very local and it's not of the high impact what we are looking for right now, but it's unique for this part of Venezuela because no other study was done with camera traps to obtain as precise information as we can do with camera traps in this part of Guiana Shield. There are a lot of studies in Guyana, in Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana, and in Brazil, while in Venezuela, considering the economic situation and all crises, there are very few research. So my interest in the place and disturbance just came gradually. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from a raised hand, someone with the nickname N. Could you please unmute and, okay. Hi, N. We can't hear you if you're trying to speak.
Hello.
N? No? Okay, so maybe during the time that, maybe there are some technical issues. So during that time, we've got another question from the chat from Marta Gajowa. The question more connected to the backside and logistics of the field work. How did your typical day would look like during the field work? And it seems like an amazing adventure, but I can imagine that it can also be hard physically and, as you also said, psychologically.
Yes, absolutely. That was 100% adventure because my typical field work that considered visiting all camera traps that I had. I don't know if I mentioned that it was 30 camera traps that was distributed over 600 kilometers square. So I was a lot of walking, and I was living in one of the indigenous communities without electricity. They had only the solar panels that I could recharge my batteries. That was crucial, but I couldn't use it for any other things that like refrigerated. So on my food, that was the rice and canned food. You can imagine eating that for 1 month. It's kind of exhausting. But I think that the place and the people that I was working with, when finally I got their confidence, they accept me like family, and that was so rewarding. and it was an amazing experience. So I didn't really care about all this inconvenience related to condition that I was living in. And some part of the field work, actually, we were walking kilometers with the backpack, with all our equipment, with tents, making sleeping over in hammocks and working all day, and then just getting back to our tent or hammock and making a fire and spending night there. So I think that it was exhausting, but at the same time it was so amazing. Like, if you want to see some pictures, I have some of them on Instagram, and I'm thinking that it was very crazy and brave, but I think I would like to repeat that.
Thank you. That sounds really amazing. Maybe apart from the canned food for a month, but as you say, it was probably manageable in the grand picture. So Anne had some technical issues and read the question on the chat. To what extent is poaching an issue in this area?
Well, we don't really talk about poaching in Grand Sabana, if you ask about the Grand Sabana particularly, because it's not poaching, it's hunting. It's the activity that the indigenous communities, at least what I was trying to measure during the study, is the activity they are taking naturally since the centuries. But what we are facing right now is an encroachment of non-indigenous communities, and with mining, there's encroachment of people that are interested in sport, hunting, and in the same time poaching. So in terms of south of Venezuela, we have increasing rate of hunting of felids like jaguar. Actually, you can see on the road skins of jaguar to sell, and there is no official control or of authorities, which is very worrying, and what we are trying to reclaim all the time. So we have information about the encroachment of poaching in south of Venezuela and in other parts, and as you know, in jaguar as a species is of the big interest of Chinese medicine, and in Guianas, in Colombia and in Bolivia, and right now also in Venezuela, there is a big pressure on poaching of this species to get to China. And as I told you, all parts of jaguar are used for different reasons, both medicinal and mostly medical.
Thank you. Okay, last couple of seconds for raising hands or typing your questions. Okay, no questions. So Izabela, thank you so much. This was a very interesting talk. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all the participants and all the interesting questions. I would just like to invite you for our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks, but it's on Tuesday, not on Wednesday. So this is different from our usual timing. And it's completely different topic again, from Alexandra Walczak about how personalized is our immune repertoire. I'm sure it will be really interesting and great. So soon there will be Facebook even on Facebook, and the update on the website. So make sure to sign up if you are interested.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. What are we doing?